Before you call the county, Cynthia, ask them one thing. Which property was here first? She stared at me across the fence like I had missed the point. Behind her, Stonehaven Ridge was celebrating the grand opening of its new clubhouse. $6.8 million of limestone, glass, landscaping, and carefully staged Texas charm. The terrace was packed. Residents stood around with drinks in their hands. Real estate agents were showing prospective buyers the pool and outdoor dining area. Somebody had hired a photographer. A white banner stretched across the entrance. Everything looked exactly the way Cynthia Langford wanted it to look. Then she glanced over my shoulder. About 50 yards away, cattle were moving through the first section of my new handling yard. Nothing unusual from where I stood. Gates, fencing, water, livestock. Normal ranch work. Cynthia looked at it like I had parked a feed truck in her living room. You cannot run that beside our clubhouse. I checked the latch on the gate before answering. I am not running it beside your clubhouse. I am running it on my ranch. Do not play games with me, Dan. I am not. Two members of the Stonehaven board had followed her across the lawn. Gregory Hale was one of them. He stopped several feet behind Cynthia and looked from the cattle yard to the clubhouse, then back at me. He already knew this conversation was not going anywhere good. Cynthia pointed toward the pens. When did you build this? You watched us build it. You told me those were ranch improvements. They are. Gregory looked away. Cynthia did not appreciate that answer. She pulled out her telephone. I am calling county enforcement. All right. She waited, probably expecting something more. That is it. What do you want me to say? I want you to shut this down until the county reviews it. I leaned against the gate. They already did. That stopped her. Not for long, but long enough for Gregory to notice. What do you mean, they already did? She asked. Exactly what it sounds like. By then, people on the terrace had started paying attention. A few residents walked toward the railing. One of the real estate agents came outside, with a couple he had been showing around. The man pointed toward my property and asked something I could not hear. Cynthia heard it. Her shoulders tightened. This facility was never approved by Stonehaven. Cynthia, why would Stonehaven approve something on Whitaker Ranch? Because it directly affects our residents. That is not what I asked. Gregory finally stepped in. Cynthia, maybe we should take this back inside. She turned on him. No, we are handling it now. There it was. Cynthia liked solving problems in front of an audience, especially when she believed she had the authority to solve them. She made the call. I went back to checking the gate. That seemed to irritate her even more. You knew today was our opening. Yes. And you chose today to bring cattle over here. They needed to be moved. You expect me to believe this is a coincidence? I looked at her. I expect you to believe they are cattle, Cynthia. They do not check your event calendar. Gregory covered a smile with his hand. She caught it. So did I. A few minutes later, more residents had gathered along the terrace. The celebration had not stopped, but the attention had shifted. Stonehaven had spent months advertising that terrace for its wide western view. Now everyone was looking west. At me. At the cattle. At the steel fencing Cynthia had spent weeks trying to prevent. What none of those people knew was that 8 months earlier, I had no intention of putting a cattle yard there. I was perfectly happy using the pasture the same way my family had used it for decades. Cynthia changed that, one letter at a time. First, she wanted the cattle moved farther from her clubhouse. Then she wanted my equipment hidden. Then she wanted limits on when I could work near the property line. Eventually, her attorney put demands in writing about what I could do with land Stonehaven had never owned. That was when I stopped asking what Cynthia wanted and started asking a different question. What was I actually allowed to do? The answer was sitting behind me that morning in steel posts and working gates. Cynthia still thought the county was coming to shut it down. I knew better, because the county had already read the paperwork she never bothered to check. 8 months earlier, there was no cattle yard beside that fence. There was not even a reason to build one there. The eastern pasture was just open grass, a water trough, a few live oaks, and whichever part of the herd happened to be grazing through that week. Then Stonehaven started pouring concrete. At first, I figured they were building more houses. Development had been moving toward us for years, so construction noise was nothing new. But this project kept getting bigger. Trucks started arriving before breakfast. Then came the stonework, tall windows, a swimming pool, and a terrace pointed straight toward my pasture. One afternoon, I pulled my truck over near the boundary and watched a crew setting a stone sign. A superintendent walked over and nodded toward the building. Quite a place, is it not? Looks expensive. He laughed. About 6.8 million when they are done. I looked at the terrace. What is it? New clubhouse, restaurant, fitness center, event space. That whole terrace is built around the western view. I looked west. There was only one thing out there. My ranch. You mean my pasture? He laughed again. Well, I guess so. A week later, I understood just how important that pasture had become to Stonehaven. One of their sales brochures showed up in my mailbox. The cover had a rendering of the finished clubhouse at sunset. There were people sitting on the terrace, and behind them was a wide stretch of green pasture with cattle scattered across it. My cattle, apparently, had been hired for advertising without telling me. I showed the brochure to Rebecca Cole, the attorney who had handled property work for my family for years. She looked at the picture and smiled. They make your place look pretty good. Think I should send them a bill? For the cattle? Modeling fee. She laughed. At that point, so did I. Nobody had crossed my fence. Nobody had claimed my land. If Stonehaven wanted to spend millions looking at my pasture, that was their business. 2 days later, Cynthia Langford drove up to my gate. She introduced herself as president of the Stonehaven Ridge Homeowners Association and handed me a business card before I had even finished saying hello. Cynthia was friendly that first day. Very friendly. She complimented the ranch, asked how long my family had owned it, then spent several minutes telling me about the clubhouse. People are excited about having something that feels connected to the landscape, she said. That is why we kept the western side so open. I glanced toward the construction. I noticed. The ranch view is really special. It is a working pasture. Of course. She said it quickly, then smiled again. That is part of the charm. I remember that word because it told me we were looking at the same piece of ground and seeing two completely different things. To Cynthia, cattle in the distance were charm. To me, they were Tuesday morning. She started talking about preserving the character of the area and keeping a clean visual transition between Stonehaven and the ranch. What does that mean? I asked. Nothing complicated. We just hope we can work together as neighbors. On what? She paused. Things that affect the view. Fencing. Equipment. Livestock. That sort of thing. There it was. Not a demand yet. Just a little test to see how I would react. Cynthia, your property ends at that fence. I know that. Good. Then we should get along fine. She gave me a smile that lasted about half a second too long. I am sure we will. She left, and for a while, I thought that was the end of it. The clubhouse kept going up. Stonehaven began advertising the next phase of homes, and the lots closest to my ranch carried some of the highest prices. Realtors brought buyers out on weekends. I would see them standing near the terrace, pointing across my pasture while they talked. Again, none of that bothered me. Their land was theirs. Mine was mine. It was a simple arrangement. Then one Monday morning, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope with the Stonehaven Ridge seal on it. Cynthia had apparently decided simple was not good enough. The first paragraph thanked me for being a valued neighboring property owner. The second paragraph asked me to move my cattle. The letter asked me to keep cattle at least 600 feet from the Stonehaven boundary. I read that sentence twice, then looked out my kitchen window at the eastern pasture. 600 feet would put a good portion of my own land off limits because somebody next door wanted a prettier view. The letter went on about odor, noise, visible equipment, and something called visual compatibility. Cynthia ended by saying she hoped we could resolve the matter informally. I folded it and put it in my desk. 3 days later, another one arrived. This time they wanted tractors and livestock trailers stored where clubhouse guests could not see them. They also asked me to avoid moving cattle through the eastern pasture on Friday evenings and weekends. I called Rebecca. You busy? That depends. I just learned my cattle have a weekend schedule. There was a pause. I am sorry, what? I read her the letter. She let me finish. Did they include a covenant? No. An easement? No. Anything showing Stonehaven has authority over your ranch. Not unless they hid it behind the part about visual compatibility. Keep the letter. I was planning to. Keep the envelope too. That was Rebecca. She could make an envelope sound important. The third letter came by certified mail 11 days later. Cynthia had stopped calling them requests. Stonehaven now wanted a written plan explaining how I intended to reduce agricultural disturbances near the clubhouse. I called Rebecca again. Another one? She asked. Certified this time. Good. Good. Dan, people are much easier to deal with when they insist on documenting everything for you. That made sense. I bought a folder and wrote Stonehaven Ridge on the front. Every letter went inside with its envelope. I took photographs of the eastern pasture as it existed that week. Fence line, water trough, tractor path, cattle, survey markers, equipment shed. Nothing fancy. I just wanted a record. A few days later, I was repairing a section of fence when a landscaping crew showed up on the Stonehaven side. They started planting young live oaks along the boundary. One of the workers waved me over. "You Mr. Whitaker?" "That is me." He pointed at the survey stake. "We were told everything stays east of this marker. Then you and I are going to get along just fine." He grinned. "That is what I like to hear." The trees did not bother me. Stonehaven could plant whatever it wanted on Stonehaven land. What caught my attention was Cynthia's next letter. She referred to the trees as part of a cooperative visual buffer between the two properties. I had not cooperated in anything. I had not even known the trees were coming. I put that letter in the folder too. By then, the clubhouse was almost finished. At sunset, those big glass windows reflected the pasture back at me. On weekends, real estate agents brought people through the property. I could sometimes hear them talking from the fence. That western exposure is one of the best features. Those lots will carry a premium. The ranch gives it a real Texas feel. Then Monday would come, and I would get another letter asking me to make the ranch less visible. That was the part one could not quite get over. They were selling the site of cattle while asking me to move the cattle. They wanted a ranch next door, just not the parts that made it a ranch. The fifth envelope was taped to my front gate on a Friday afternoon. Cynthia wanted a meeting. She said Stonehaven needed to establish enforceable boundary standards before the clubhouse opened. I stood there for a moment with the letter in my hand. Enforceable was a new word. So I called the county clerk. "I need everything recorded against the eastern section of Whitaker Ranch." The woman on the telephone asked what I meant by everything. Restrictions, easements, plats, land use records. If it has my parcel number on it, I want a copy. Then I called Rebecca. "How thick is the folder now?" she asked. 5 letters. "And has Cynthia shown you anything that actually gives Stonehaven authority over your land?" "Not one page." Rebecca went quiet for a second. "All right, bring me the folder. You think there is a problem?" "I think Cynthia keeps using the word enforceable. So I would like to know what she thinks she can enforce before you sit down with her." That was good enough for me. I put the folder in my truck. The meeting with Cynthia was set for Tuesday morning. Up to that point, she had been careful enough to put most of her demands on paper. On Tuesday, she finally came to the ranch and said out loud what Stonehaven really wanted from me. Cynthia arrived Tuesday morning at 10 with Gregory Hale from the Stonehaven board. She stepped out of her white sport utility vehicle carrying a leather folder. Gregory gave me a small wave. "Morning, Dan." "Morning." Cynthia looked toward the house. "Is there somewhere we can sit?" I pointed to the picnic table beside the equipment barn. Gregory sat down. Cynthia looked at the dusty bench and stayed standing. I poured myself coffee from a thermos. "All right, what do you need?" Cynthia opened her folder and laid 3 photographs on the table. All 3 had been taken from the new clubhouse terrace. One showed cattle near my eastern fence. Another showed my tractor beside a hay feeder. The third showed a livestock trailer parked near the service lane. She tapped the first photograph. "This is what we need to address before the clubhouse opens." I looked at it. "That is Earl." Gregory glanced at me. "Who is Earl?" "The red steer." Gregory laughed before he could stop himself. Cynthia did not. "Dan, I am serious." "So am I. What exactly is the problem?" "The problem is that Stonehaven has invested almost $7 million in that facility. We have an outdoor restaurant, private events, prospective buyers, and residents who paid premiums for those views." "Okay." She waited. "That is all you have to say?" "I am waiting for the part that involves me." Cynthia slid another photograph forward. "We need some predictability along this boundary." "Predictability how?" "Livestock farther from the fence. Equipment stored somewhere less visible. No unnecessary activity during events. Better screening in certain areas." "On my side." "Obviously on your side." I took a sip of coffee. "Then I am confused. If it is my side, why are you making the schedule?" Gregory looked down at the table. Cynthia took a breath. "Nobody is trying to run your ranch. Your letters are getting pretty close. We are asking you to be reasonable. I have been running cattle here for more than 30 years. What changed?" She pointed toward Stonehaven. "That changed." I looked at the clubhouse. "You built it?" "Yes. Next to a ranch. We built it beside what was an open pasture. Cynthia, an open pasture on a cattle ranch is still a cattle ranch. She closed the folder halfway, then opened it again. You are making this more difficult than it needs to be. I do not think I am. Gregory finally spoke. Maybe we can find a middle ground. Dan, would moving the herd farther west during major events really hurt anything? I looked at him. How many events? I do not know. How many cattle? I do not know. For how long? He rubbed the back of his neck. Fair point. Cynthia stepped in before he could say anything else. She explained that Stonehaven had more than 40 homes planned for the next phase, and that the western lots were expected to sell at a premium. The clubhouse was supposed to anchor the entire expansion. Weddings were already being booked. Private dinners were scheduled. Real estate presentations would happen on the terrace. The more she talked, the clearer it became. This was not about one tractor or a few cattle near a fence. Stonehaven had built part of its business plan around a view across land it did not own. So people are paying extra because they can see my pasture? I asked. They are paying for the Stonehaven experience. Does Stonehaven own the view? Cynthia stared at me. That is not how property value works. I know. That is why I asked. Gregory leaned back and said nothing. Cynthia gathered the photographs. There are legal remedies when neighboring land uses interfere with residential property. Maybe there are. I would rather not go that route. Neither would I. That seemed to relax her until I added. But if you think you have a legal right here, send it to Rebecca. Rebecca? My attorney. Cynthia paused. You have already contacted an attorney? You sent me 5 letters using words like enforceable. It seemed polite to find out what they meant. Gregory looked at Cynthia. That was the first moment I saw her lose control of the meeting. Only for a second. She put the photographs back into her folder and headed toward her vehicle. At the gate, she stopped and looked over the pasture. Dan, this whole area is changing. 340 acres are not going to stay untouched forever. Probably not. She turned back, maybe surprised that I agreed. Then you understand. I understand change just fine. I just do not remember giving Stonehaven the job of deciding what changes on my ranch. She left without answering. Gregory gave me an apologetic nod before following her. That evening, I walked the eastern fence as the clubhouse lights came on across the property line. For the first time, I understood how much money Stonehaven had tied to that view. I also understood something Cynthia had not bothered to ask. Years before Stonehaven existed, somebody else had wanted that same pasture badly enough to put a serious offer on our kitchen table. Margaret had been the one who said no. Margaret would have liked the joke about Earl. She had a name for half the cattle and an opinion about the other half. We were married 34 years, and somewhere along the way Whitaker Ranch became as much hers as mine. My grandfather started the place with 80 acres. My father bought neighboring parcels when he could afford them. By the time Margaret and I were running it together, we had 340 acres and more work than either of us admitted. She handled records better than I did. I handled fences better than she did, although she would have argued about that. One morning, years before Stonehaven existed, a developer sat at our kitchen table and offered to buy 60 acres along the eastern side. The number on the page was enough to make me read it twice. Margaret read it once. The developer spent nearly an hour explaining what they wanted to build. Streets, houses, landscaped entrances, maybe some small commercial space near the county road. When he finished, Margaret asked, "What happens to the pasture?" He looked confused. "It becomes the development." "I know that. I mean what happens to the ranch after we cut 60 acres off it." He started talking about how much money we would have left to improve the rest of the property. Margaret listened, thanked him for coming, and waited until his truck was gone. Then she looked at me. "You want to sell?" "I do not know." "That means you are thinking about it." "It is a lot of money." "It is." She poured more coffee. "So what would we do with it?" I gave her the usual answers. Pay down debt. Replace equipment. Put money away. Maybe work a little less. She nodded. "And when somebody comes back for the next 60 acres? I did not have an answer. Margaret did. "Dan, if selling makes sense for the ranch someday, fine. But do not sell because somebody else has decided our land would be more useful to them." We turned the offer down. Years later, when Margaret got sick, that eastern pasture became one of the few places she still wanted to visit when she had enough energy. I would drive us out near the old live oak with 2 cups of coffee. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just sat there. Near the end, she made me promise one thing about the ranch. Do what makes sense for the place, she said, not what makes somebody else comfortable. I had not thought about that sentence in a long time. Cynthia brought it back. After our meeting, I went into the little office behind the kitchen and opened Margaret's old filing cabinet. Her labels were still there in black marker. Taxes, cattle, insurance, property. She used to say my filing system was wherever I dropped something last. She was not wrong. I pulled the Eastern property file and carried it to the kitchen table. Most of it was exactly what I expected. Deeds, surveys, tax records, old maps. Then I found a faded envelope with Margaret's handwriting across the front. Eastern pasture land use. What did you save now? I said to an empty kitchen. Inside was a county map I had not looked at in years. My father had filed it when he was considering changes to the cattle operation. It showed the Eastern service lane, water access, livestock routes, and a proposed handling area that was never built. I leaned closer. The proposed area sat near the same stretch of boundary where Stonehaven had later built its clubhouse. I did not know whether the old map still mattered. I knew better than to pretend it did, so I took a picture and sent it to Rebecca. My telephone rang 20 minutes later. Where did you get this? She asked. Margaret's files. Do you have the original? Sitting in front of me. And the reference number in the lower corner? I read it to her. I could hear her typing. Then she stopped. Interesting. That good interesting or expensive interesting? I do not know yet. Rebecca. Dan, I mean it. This is old. It does not give you permission to build anything today. I figured. But it tells me what records to pull. I looked again at the map. What are you looking for? Stonehaven has spent months telling you what they do not want you doing on that pasture. I noticed. I want to know what the county says you can do. She told me not to mention the map to Cynthia yet. The next morning, Rebecca started pulling records. By the end of the week, we were sitting across from a county land use official with Margaret's old folder between us, and the conversation had stopped being about what Stonehaven wanted. Rebecca called me 4 days later. Can you come into town tomorrow morning? What did you find? Enough that I would rather show you. That was usually Rebecca's way of telling me not to get ahead of myself. The next morning, I met her at the county administration building. She had taken over one end of a conference table with maps, plats, property records, and a yellow legal pad covered in her handwriting. I sat down across from her. This looks expensive. You already used that joke. Still looks expensive. She pushed a map toward me. Start here. This is Whitaker Ranch. This line is Stonehaven. I followed the boundary with my finger. Same fence I have been looking at for years. Exactly. Now show me where your property becomes part of their homeowners association. I looked at her. It does not. Correct. She slid another document over. I found no covenant putting your ranch under Stonehaven control. No agreement giving their board authority over your livestock. No restriction letting Cynthia set your operating hours. Nothing. So the letters? They are letters. I laughed. Cynthia is not going to like that answer. Cynthia does not have to like county records. Then Rebecca pulled out Margaret's old map. This is where things get more interesting. Your father's proposed handling area was never built, so do not treat this as an old permit. It is not. Understood. But it led me to the agricultural records for this parcel. The Eastern pasture had a long documented history of cattle use. The county files showed agricultural valuation, livestock access, water infrastructure, and service routes going back decades. None of that meant I could build whatever I wanted. Rebecca made that clear before I could ask. Current rules still apply. Setbacks, drainage, access, whatever the county requires today. Fine by me. Good. Because we are going downstairs. Why? I made us an appointment. Mark Ellison from the county land use office met us 20 minutes later. He was a quiet man with reading glasses and the kind of desk that made Rebecca's conference table look organized. He took Margaret's map, looked at the reference number, then pulled up my parcel on his computer. You still running cattle out there? He asked. Every day. How long? My family. Decades. He nodded. And this eastern section has stayed in agricultural use. Yes. Mark clicked through several records. I waited. Rebecca waited. Finally, I asked, can Stonehaven tell me where to keep cattle on my own pasture? Mark looked over his glasses. That is a legal question broader than what I do here. I can tell you what the county records show. Fair enough. He pointed at the screen. Your parcel is not part of Stonehaven. I do not see anything in our land use file that turns this section into their open space or gives their association county enforcement authority over it. Rebecca asked, what about agricultural use? Still documented, including livestock facilities? Mark leaned back. Depends on the facility. That was the first answer all morning that interested me. What kind would be allowed? Tell me what you want to build. I do not know yet. Then I cannot tell you. He opened a county checklist and slid it across the desk. But if you were talking about cattle handling, sorting, temporary holding, something connected to an existing ranch operation, this is where you start. Site plan, setbacks, drainage, road access, water, any required construction review. I looked at Rebecca. She said nothing. Mark noticed. What? Nothing, I said. I am just reading. Good. Read before you build. Saves everybody trouble. I liked Mark immediately. No speeches. No promises. Just rules. Before we left, Rebecca asked one more question. If Dan meets the current requirements, does the fact that Stonehaven later built a clubhouse next door automatically prohibit an agricultural facility on his parcel? Mark shook his head. Not automatically, no. Outside, Rebecca handed me the checklist. Now we know something useful. That Cynthia cannot boss me around. You already knew that. She tapped the paper. Now we know there may be a perfectly ordinary ranch use for that pasture that Stonehaven cannot simply wish away. Over the next week, we measured the eastern section, checked the service lane, and hired a surveyor to confirm the boundary. Then Rebecca found a planning exhibit buried in Stonehaven's own development records. She called me over and pointed to two words printed across my pasture. Rural Open View. I stared at them. That is my land. Yes. They labeled my land as their view. They did. Is that illegal? Not by itself. Stupid. Rebecca smiled. I do not bill for opinions on stupid. That was when the whole thing finally made sense. Stonehaven had designed a $6.8 million clubhouse around scenery it did not control. Then Cynthia tried to control it afterward with letters. I looked down at my father's old map again. The north pins were aging. The eastern service lane had better road access. Water was already close. Rebecca, what if we actually built the handling yard Dad planned? She stopped smiling. Because the ranch needs it? The old pins need replacing anyway. And not because you want to ruin Cynthia's view? If I wanted to ruin her view, I would plant a billboard. Rebecca nodded toward the county checklist. Then we do this the boring way. Meaning, survey, plans, review, every requirement. No shortcuts. That suited me. Cynthia had spent months trying to turn her preferences into rules. I was about to find out what the actual rules said. Before we filed anything, Cynthia sent the letter Rebecca had been expecting. It came by certified mail from Stonehaven's attorney. Rebecca called me before I finished breakfast. Did you get yours? Sitting right here. Last page. Second paragraph. I found it. Stonehaven wanted written confirmation that I would not expand livestock operations or build any new agricultural facility visible from the clubhouse. I read it again. They want me to promise not to build on my own land. That is what they are asking. Can they make me? Not because they put it on law firm letterhead. I heard papers moving on her desk. Bring it in. We are taking this to Mark. The letter went further than the others. Stonehaven wanted cattle kept away from the eastern boundary. They wanted equipment movement limited during clubhouse events. They even wanted advance notice of agricultural work that might affect what they called the member experience. By 10 o'clock, Rebecca had the letter spread across her conference table beside our survey. She pointed to the last demand. This is useful. Does not feel useful. They finally stopped being vague. Now we know exactly what they think they can control. She pulled out the preliminary plan for the cattle yard. Before this goes any further, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Why are you building here? We already talked about that. I know. Say it again. I leaned back. The north pins are worn out. This pasture already has water nearby. The old service lane connects to the county road. It cuts down the distance when we move cattle for sorting and loading. And Cynthia? What about her? Is annoying her the reason? No. Good. Because if she complains, I want the answer to be boring. I smiled. You lawyers really know how to have fun. Boring wins property disputes. That afternoon, we sat across from Mark Ellison again. He read Stonehaven's demand without much expression. Then he looked at me. You joined their homeowners association? No. Signed any agreement with them? No. He looked at Rebecca. Anything I have. Not seen. Nothing recorded against Dan's parcel that gives Stonehaven this authority. Mark tapped the letter with one finger. Then from the county side, their association rules do not become land use rules just because they mailed them to him. I pointed to the paragraph about future livestock facilities. What about that? They are free to object. You are free to apply. We review the application under the rules for your parcel. Rebecca slid our preliminary site plan toward him. Then let us talk about this. Mark adjusted his glasses. Cattle handling yard, sorting and temporary holding, I said. Replacing old pens on the north side. He started asking questions. How many cattle at one time? Where would trucks enter? Where was the nearest water connection? How would runoff be handled? How far were the pens from the surveyed boundary? It was not dramatic. That was the point. Mark did not care about Cynthia's clubhouse, and he did not care whether I liked Cynthia. He cared about measurements. Drainage needs another look, he said, and confirm this access width. Anything else? Probably. That is why we review plans. Rebecca smiled. He really hates giving people good news. Mark looked at her. Good news is when people follow the plan. We filed 2 days later. The county asked for a drainage revision, so we made one. The surveyor confirmed the access width. Rebecca answered a question about the historic agricultural records. Then we waited. Cynthia did not. Another letter came. Then Gregory called me at home. Dan, are you building something over there? Why do you ask? Cynthia says you are planning some kind of livestock facility. She has been telling me what I cannot build for months. I suppose she finally got curious about what I can. Gregory sighed. Some of us asked her to drop this. What did she say? She thinks backing down makes the board look weak. I was quiet for a second. Gregory, this is a cattle pasture. It is not a campaign. I know. Does she? He did not answer. A little over 2 weeks later, Rebecca called while I was replacing a hinge on the north pens. Dan, the county finished its review. And the submitted plan. Cleared. Build what was approved, keep the documents on site, and do not get creative. I looked at the old gate hanging crooked in front of me. You know, I am starting to think you do not trust me. I trust you. I do not trust irritated property owners. Fair enough. The next morning, I called the fencing contractor. He pulled up the site plan while we talked. Eastern pasture? That is right. Near Stonehaven? That is the one. He went quiet. They know about this? They know I own a ranch. He laughed. That was not my question. It is the answer that matters. He told me his crew could start Monday. I hung up and looked through the window toward the clubhouse. For months, Cynthia had wanted me to explain what I planned to do with my own land. Monday morning, I would not have to explain anything. The fencing crew showed up Monday morning a little after 7. By noon, the first steel posts were in the ground. By Wednesday, anybody who knew cattle could tell exactly what we were building. Cynthia apparently needed another day. She pulled up on the Stonehaven side Thursday afternoon and sat in her vehicle watching us work. I was checking the location of a sorting gate when she finally got out. Dan. Morning, Cynthia. What is this? I looked around. Which part? All of it. New cattle pens. She stared at me. You are actually building them here? That is what the plan says. What plan? The one the county reviewed. That took some of the wind out of her. She walked closer to the boundary, but stopped at the fence. You never told the board you were doing this. The board never asked permission to build the clubhouse. That is completely different. It is. You built on your land. I am building on mine. She looked past me at the posts. This is retaliation. No. The north pens are worn out. This location has better road access, water nearby, and a service lane already in place. You own 340 acres. I do. And you picked the one place directly across from our clubhouse. My father picked it before your clubhouse existed. She blinked. What? Old ranch plans. Long story. Cynthia pulled out her telephone. Our attorney will challenge this. He knows where the county office is. She looked at me for a few seconds, waiting for an argument. I went back to the gate. By that afternoon, Rebecca had already received a call from Stonehaven's attorney. Mark's office got one too. The county checked the file again. The next morning, Rebecca called. Stonehaven filed an objection. And the county reviewed it. You enjoy making me ask twice. Nothing changed. Keep building what was approved. Work continued. The main pens went in first, then the sorting gates, water connection, and loading area. Cynthia came by almost every day. Sometimes she stayed in her vehicle. Sometimes she photographed the work from Stonehaven property. Once she brought Gregory. He stood beside her looking at the nearly finished yard. That is bigger than I expected, he said. It is a working facility, I told him. Cynthia turned to him. Do not encourage him. Gregory looked tired. I asked how big it was. You should be asking why the county allowed it. I answered before Gregory could. Because it is a cattle ranch. Cynthia looked at me. You think this is funny? No. I think it is getting expensive for both of us to keep having the same conversation. Gregory nodded slightly. Cynthia noticed. 2 weeks before the clubhouse opening, Stonehaven's attorney requested another review. Rebecca called Mark herself. Are we missing anything? She asked him on speakerphone. Not in the approved county file. They are telling residents the project may be stopped. Mark sighed. Then they should stop telling residents that. Rebecca looked at me. Cynthia said she plans to request an inspection as soon as Dan starts operating. That is fine, Mark said. Have the approved documents on site. If a complaint comes in, we will handle it through the normal process. That mattered later. Nobody was going to appear out of nowhere because Cynthia made a telephone call. The county already knew she intended to challenge the facility the moment cattle entered it. 3 days before the grand opening, the final gate went up. A small project notice near the service entrance identified the site as an agricultural livestock handling facility. Cynthia saw it that evening. I was checking the water line when I noticed her standing across the fence reading the sign. She did not call my name. She just looked from the sign to the clubhouse terrace behind her. For the first time in months, she seemed to understand that the letters had not worked. Friday afternoon, Rebecca came out with the final file. We walked the yard together. Drainage? She asked. Done. Access? Done. Water? Working. She checked the paperwork. Keep this in the truck tomorrow. Across the fence, Stonehaven employees were setting white tablecloths on the terrace. A florist carried arrangements through the clubhouse doors. Luxury vehicles moved through the front entrance. Big day for them, Rebecca said. Looks like it. Big day for you too? Not really. We need to move cattle through here tomorrow. She looked at me. During their opening? Rebecca, I am not changing the ranch schedule every time Cynthia serves brunch. She laughed. I just wanted to hear you say it. Saturday morning, Stonehaven would open its clubhouse at 9. We planned to start working cattle shortly after that. Cynthia had already told the county she would complain. The county already had our file. Everybody knew what was coming except the residents arriving for champagne and a quiet western view. By 9 o'clock Saturday morning, the Stonehaven terrace was full. Residents stood around with coffee and champagne while real estate agents walked prospective buyers through the clubhouse. Cynthia was near the entrance in a cream blazer, smiling for photographs beside the ribbon. From my side of the fence, I could hear applause when she started speaking. I did not hear much of the speech. We had cattle to move. At 9:12, I opened the eastern gate. The first group came through without any trouble. We moved them into the holding area, checked the sorting gates, and started using the yard exactly the way we had planned. Nothing dramatic, just ranch work. Then somebody on the clubhouse terrace noticed. A few people moved toward the railing. A realtor stopped talking in the middle of a tour. One man pointed toward us and asked, "Is that part of Stonehaven?" The realtor did not seem to know. Cynthia did. She stopped her speech, handed the microphone to someone beside her, and headed across the lawn. Gregory followed, although not with much enthusiasm. Dan. Morning. Stop what you are doing. Why? You know why. I really do not. She pointed toward the cattle. You chose our grand opening for this. We needed to work cattle today. You could have done it tomorrow. Could have. Did not need to. This is deliberate. I closed the gate behind the last animal. Cynthia, I have cattle. You built a clubhouse next to cattle. I do not know what else to tell you. Gregory looked down, hiding a smile. Cynthia pulled out her telephone. I am calling the county. You told them you were going to. And now they can see exactly what you have done. That is fine. She made the call. Behind her, more people were gathering at the terrace railing. That seemed to bother her more than the cattle. She turned toward them and raised her voice. The county is addressing it. A woman near the railing called back. Was this not approved? Cynthia hesitated. There are questions about the approval. Gregory looked at her. Cynthia. Not now, Gregory. About 25 minutes later, Mark Ellison pulled into the service entrance. His office had already reviewed Stonehaven's objection, and Rebecca had warned him that Cynthia intended to file a complaint once the yard began operating. He was not arriving to rescue me. He was responding to the complaint everybody knew was coming. Rebecca arrived a few minutes later with our file. Cynthia met Mark near the boundary. You can see the problem, she said. Mark looked at the cattle yard. I can see the facility. During our grand opening. I do not regulate event schedules, ma'am. Gregory coughed into his hand. Cynthia ignored him. This facility is directly beside a residential amenity. Mark nodded. And the residential amenity is directly beside agricultural property. That got quiet. Cynthia tried another angle. Our residents have a right to enjoy their property. They do. Then this cannot be allowed to interfere with that. Mark opened his folder. Stonehaven filed an objection. We reviewed it. Mr. Whitaker's facility cleared the county requirements applicable to the submitted plan. If you believe there is a separate private legal claim, that is something for your attorney. It does not make your homeowners association rules county regulations. By then, people had come down from the terrace. One of them, a man I recognized from Stonehaven sales events, spoke up. Wait, the ranch is not part of the homeowners association. Gregory answered before Cynthia could. No. A woman beside him frowned. Then why were we told the western view would be protected? Nobody answered. A realtor standing nearby looked at Cynthia. The brochures call it an open ranch view. It is an open ranch view, Cynthia said. The woman pointed toward my side of the fence. Apparently, it is also an operating ranch. Gregory rubbed his forehead. Then another resident asked the question that ended the argument. Did the board know agricultural facilities could be permitted here before approving $6.8 million for the clubhouse? Cynthia looked at Gregory. Gregory looked back at her. We discussed the neighboring agricultural use, he said carefully. We did not have authority over it. Cynthia's face tightened. That is not the full context. Then what is the full context? The resident asked. Cynthia had spent months finding words for me. Suddenly, she did not have many. I went back to work. There was nothing I could say that would improve on what everyone had just heard. The clubhouse stayed open. So did the cattle yard. Stonehaven did not lose an inch of property, and neither did I. The letters stopped. A few months later, I ran into Gregory at a hardware store. He shook his head when he saw me. Those trees along the fence are growing fast. Good trees. Cynthia says they need more. She can plant as many as she wants. He laughed. On our side. Now you are getting it. The new yard turned out to be one of the better improvements I had made in years. It shortened the route from the eastern pasture, gave us better truck access, and replaced pens that should have been retired long ago. My father had seen the location's value decades before I did. Margaret had saved the map that led me back to it. I never needed Stonehaven to lose its clubhouse. I only needed them to understand where their control ended. They had paid millions for a beautiful view. Their mistake was thinking the view came with the land behind it.